the issue with the new pass interference rule. So, for those of you who don't know, the owners' meetings, they had a resolution passed, or there was a new rule change, and what it said is now teams can challenge no calls or calls. So if there's pass interference called, or if there's one not called, a team can then challenge to make the refs look at it again. I got some opinions on this, but Ian, we've talked about this before. Back when the Saints, this is all because of the Saints-Rams. I think let's not kid ourselves here. And we both came to different conclusions. You were very in defense of the Saints and felt that the Saints were, cheated, hoodwinked, robbed, bamboozled.
Just the fact that anybody could possibly say that it wasn't, and I don't think you guys were saying it wasn't a pass interference.
Yeah, no, we all agree. I think everybody on the planet agrees it was a pass interference.
I disagreed with the theory that if Drew Brees hadn't thrown the interception in overtime, then the Saints would have won still. I'm like, if they would have just gotten the pass interference call, they would have had to go to overtime. We've had that discussion. We had the discussion.
I
mean, this rule, I think it's upsetting to a lot of people for now.
Well, I think we both had that discussion, too. We both were like, okay, look, we shouldn't review pass interference calls, even though we both came to different conclusions, and then they did it. So, again.
And now what you've got is basically a rule, like CJ said, it allows you to overturn a pass interference call that did or did not happen. In this case, it would help, but what about in the case of Hail Marys? And on Hail Marys, there's a lot of pushing and shoving. A lot of times there would be a pass interference called, and maybe on some of those Hail Marys, if a defender is scared of getting that call, they won't play good enough defense, and it'll just result in a lot more Hail Marys. Now, maybe that's great for fans. They want to see Hail Marys and heroics, but if a team played well enough to win a game and put yourself in a position where they need a 70-yard bomb, they probably deserve to win unless there is some hope of God in the ball. But either way, I think this rule, it's going to be only as successful as how well it's handled on the review. Because I'm gonna compare this to what FIFA has done over the last, I'll say 2 summers now, because it has been 2 summers coming up this June, where they started implementing video review to 4 different aspects of the game. I can't remember all 4 off the top of my head. It's red cards, offside, on goals, and there's a couple others that they can review. And what I was thinking is, what soccer is there's no stoppages for things like this. Obviously, there's some instances where human error, I think I talked about it exactly when I brought this up the first time, England and Germany, World Cup quarterfinals, 2006 or something like that. Ball was clearly across the line for England. They would have beaten Germany in regular time. Germany won on penalties, yada, yada. And it's for rules like that. It's for instances like that. And it's been handled very well so far in FIFA, where they don't take extended amounts of time. But I think you see that in the NFL and college basketball and the NBA, where the last couple minutes of a game can just take forever, especially in basketball, where they just, who is it out off of? We gotta go to the monitor and check for another 3 to 4 minutes. So it all depends on how well it's handled by replay officials, in my opinion, to see how successful this new implemented rule change is.
Yeah, and I think another thing, too, is an explanation for why they always go to replays, because the refs always want to be like, well, we looked at the video. You can't blame us. You can't, because it's easy to blame the refs. And well, you can't look at us. We reviewed it. And that's the one thing, like you said, there's human error and all that, and even looking at the replays. When has the NFL ever screwed up looking at an instant replay? I mean, when have they ever, they always, every single time they look at it, they always look and say, that was the right or wrong call. And I think
in the NFL, if I'm not
that was
mistaken,
sarcasm.
They have a system in place where they have a pager, do they not, where it says you should look at this.
I think they do. They have somebody up.
Is it on the officials?
They have somebody up in the booth who will stop play now, but that's for catches and touchdowns and all that kind of stuff. That's not for pass interference, I believe. I believe it's just the coaches have to be like, hey, take a look at that. So, and now what I'm wondering...
is it a challengeable play?
It's a challenge.
So it's not up to the referees to call that. It's a challengeable play.
I think is the rule now. I think that's the rule.
See, no, that's not terrible.
I don't know.
I don't hate that. If any pass interference call can be challenged by another official and say, well, hang on, let's look at that to see, that would be not good. If it's up to a coach...
But won't it get there, though?
Think it'll be, and it could. But for now, I'm saying... I don't have a problem with it being a challengeable play, especially if you still have a challenge left or you have 2. One thing that my mom mostly brings up is, why are the NFL coaches limited to 3 challenges? especially if you get all three of those right. Now, granted, I've only seen it like a number of times where a coach has gotten all three challenges right, or even gotten the first two right and had an opportunity to get that third one. So, it's kind of one of those things that your mother brings up, and you're like, well, it just happens.
Yeah.
So, but that's the thing. If it happens so unlikely, why not just keep giving them challenge flags? And if they're getting them right, but that's a topic for a different time. But with FIFA and their implemented rules, I think they've done a great job with it. They have replay officials in their booth, so to speak, already. And if they feel it is necessary for a review by the official on the field, the head official, they will page him or do whatever. He'll get a little beep, and he'll go and take a look at it. I've never seen it take more than maybe 90 seconds to look at a call. Maybe it's because of the rules that they have to challenge, though. In soccer, there isn't a whole lot of it's very cut and dry. It's either over the line or it's not. It's either offsides or it's not. It's not a did it break the plane? I don't know. There's 13 bodies.
Did he have control?
Exactly. So it's probably a lot easier to do that sort of thing faster in soccer, but hopefully it can be handled at a pace that doesn't slow down the game too much.
Here's my thing. The league has gotten so reactionary. Mm-hmm. And you see this all the time, and this can be applied for more than sports. When you make decisions based on pure reaction, on pure emotion, without thinking about it, you just say, this happened. Why did this happen? Let's change that, without kind of thinking it through or giving it time. You tend to make worse decisions. When, when somebody hits you and your first instinct is to go, I'm going to hit him back right away, and you go, wait a minute, if I do that, we could start something worse. And you kind of think about that, or this guy did this to me, how am I going to react? What's it going to be? And sometimes the ones you make off pure emotion, or the ones you make just instantly, typically are the wrong decisions. Typically. And that's what the league has done. The league has made reactionary policies a long time. They've been doing this for years. This hasn't been a new thing. Remember back in the 2009 NFC Championship game, when the Saints got the ball to start overtime, they marched right down the field, kicked a field goal, and some people, I don't know, I guess maybe I didn't know how the league was paying attention at the time, but I felt like there was a small contingent. There wasn't a big group of Vikings fans or people on the Vikings coaching staff, or even people around the NFL, because I know Rodgers and McCarthy came out against overtime rules even now currently. They didn't like the sudden death overtime. So the NFL made a reactionary rule change that offseason. They didn't say, okay, we'll think of some ideas, and then the next year, once we have a full year to kind of think this stuff through, we'll kind of bring it to the table. They immediately crammed down a new policy, and to be honest, has it really made overtime that much more exciting? Because then a few years later, they were like, there's too much overtime. Players don't like it, so we're going to cut overtime by 5 minutes. Now there's more ties, which screw up everything. I mean, that reactionary rule, and I was a Vikings fan. I was like 12 years old at the time, and I saw this new rule change. I'm like, this is kind of dumb. Like, if you're going to make it so each team gets the ball, just play an extra quarter. Like, play the whole thing. Don't just do this sudden death touchdown. What is this even?
So like soccer.
Yeah.
Where essentially, in soccer, if you don't know this, they don't have, they ended ties a lot, and that's why a lot of Americans don't like it. I hate ties in everything but soccer. But if they have to go to an extra time, they play a full 30 minutes, no matter if somebody scores or not. And if it's still tied at the end of that, say both teams score 2 goals in that 30 minutes, they'll go to penalties after that. Or maybe in the NFL's case, it would end in a tie, because you're not going to have like a field goal kicking competition at the end of the game to decide it. That would be ridiculous. At FIFA, figure out a way to end your games. But that.
Well, and here's the thing.
The overtime rules do need a change, I think.
In the NFL, they do. They need to figure something out. And let's look at another one. Roughing the passer. A year ago, the Anthony Barr hit on Aaron Rodgers. The Packers were fuming. Packers fans were fuming about the dirty hit. And then the NFL, the owners, sipping cocktails, watching the play 50 times in slow motion. And that, I think, is a big thing. Slow motion. I'll get to that in a second. And they watch it in slow motion and go, that did look kind of bad. We should fix it. And then NFL owners, half of whom do not actually really know football that much. They know less than the casual fan. Not all owners, but a lot of them, don't know a lot about actually football. And then when it comes down to it, they make rule changes that mess up the game. Like we spent the first half of the year complaining about roughing the passer rules. Because here's the thing. It's not just about the rule change. It's the fact that they crammed it in 2 months and then made the referees figure it out on the fly without figuring out a way to implement it. They just made the policy. And we spent time
the roughing
criticizing.
the passer became less of a problem as the season went on, whether that was because they were calling it less or because the players had started to adjust.
I think it's that they were calling it less.
It could have been.
I don't know, but that's again, I don't have anything to back that up. But and I don't know, because with the instant replay, it changes everything, because it looks like holding on every single play if you slow it down.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of times where you slow a play down, you're like, oh, he did kind of graze the face mask. He did maybe tug on the arm. So if a ref is going to look at it in slow motion and he hits a receiver's hand, and in slow motion it looks a lot worse than what it would in real time, do you think flopping is going to be on the rise in the NFL? Because I think it has a chance. I'm not saying it would, but I say it's got a better chance now. And I don't know, the PI review, these are all things by owners sipping cocktails, half of whom don't even know anything about football, are sitting there making rule changes because they want, they got outrage. So instead of just standing pat, they give in to the backlash, and then they make a reactionary policy that ends up, and it's not just that it ruins the game, but it's that it makes fans mad. Like the roughing the passer got a lot of fans disinterested in the NFL. Now they still came back because it's still football, but it still has people annoyed at their meddling in the game. And I get after Major League Baseball at this all the time for saying, stop meddling with the game. And football does the exact same thing. You got to just, because the NFL's been trying to meddle with the game for years, making the goalpost shorter, taking out, making extra points longer, kickoffs, punts, fair catches, all this kind of thing. They've been meddling with the game for years, and it's like every single year we have this big new rule change, and it's getting kind of annoying.
Well, if we're almost done on this point, I can transition this smoothly into our next segment, unless you have more.
Okay, I got a couple.
Go ahead.
I got a couple things. So this is just the start, I feel like, though. So if you can challenge pass interference, what's to say in a couple of years, man, there was a big-time holding play on my offensive lineman. Why shouldn't we review that? And someone said, well, why not review a face mask? Why not review an encroachment or an offsides? Why not see if Rudy was actually really offsides? I mean, I don't think he was, but maybe he was. We got to look back on replay and figure it out.
Was Artie Burns offside against the Chargers 3 straight times in a row? The third time so egregiously that he flew past the blocking attempt.
Do we got to look back to see if it was roughing the punter? Roughing the passer? Do we got to look at that again?
Your question is, at what point does it stop?
And I don't think it will stop.
Is everything reviewable?
This also slows down the game, like you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Certain sports have perfected it more than others. You use the soccer reference a lot. Replay,
well, like I said, it's easier in soccer because the things you have to review just don't take as long.
Replay is a necessary evil in certain instances. Touchdowns, turnovers, completely understandable. Those things,
Well, and you want to get it 100% right, but you also want the game to not take 5 hours. When it's a Week 4 game against a non-rival,
if this Rams versus Saints call would have happened, like you said, in a Week 4 matchup, nobody really would have cared as much. But when it happens in the NFC Championship, it would have been a
big deal. It's like, oh well, we would have gotten the 1 seed,
but it's because it's the last game that
literally a Super Bowl was on the line. It was in the fourth quarter with under 2 minutes to go in the NFC Championship game. It was blown way out of. Maybe not way out of proportion, because it was a terrible no call. It was
one of the worst no calls we've talked about.
Especially given the situation. So but like you said, if that happened in the second quarter of a Week 4 game, it just wouldn't have been. It would not have held the same weight.
Well, and just be careful what you wish for, because just because it fixes that situation, and that's the thing with the Vikings. Just because maybe it would have fixed the NFC Championship game situation, there were probably a couple situations. I think the Vikings had an overtime game against Baltimore that same year, and they ended up winning on a Ryan Longwell field goal in overtime right away. They had the ball first.
Yep.
I remember. They would have lost that game. They would not have had home field advantage, maybe. That would have mattered.
Well, and you can't prove that the Ravens are going to go down and score, but...
Exactly.
But what if they would have?
Yeah, what if they would have? And, what if... And that's the thing.
Well, what if they wouldn't have? What if they would have?
And it's all hypothetical. Just be careful what you wish for. And that's the same thing with the roughing the passer rule. Because the Packers fans, who are so happy that they were going to start protecting their quarterback, are the same ones that got mad at the officials because they kept calling it on Clay Matthews. Be careful what you wish for.